Burnout recovery stages. Interview with Victor Bartley. Do you feel from time to time that you're at brink of burnout or that you're burnt out but you're trying to recover from it? There's a lot of information about the stages of burnout. But what about stages of recovering from burnout? What steps you can do to recover from it, and how would you know that you have reached there? So if you'd like to learn more, stay tuned. In this episode, our guest Victor Bartley has some great pointers for us from to bouncing back from burnout and recover and be the best version of ourselves. You are watching episode 87 of Happy and Healthy Mind Show. Thank you for joining. I'm sure you're going to learn a lot. Thank you, Victor, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Doc.
You're welcome. Victor Bartley is a speaker, author, and coach who is on mission to guide those who are burned out on the journey of wellness. He firmly believes that burnout is an invitation to begin again. He enjoys his life with his wife, Dr. Wendy, and their three toddlers. And I'm your host, Dr. Rosina. I help organizations reduce negative consequences of burnout. I'm also a speaker, author, and an integrative psychiatrist. I believe that your mind is the software that runs the hardware of your brain and your body. Therefore, I share practical tips for your mental fitness so you can live your best life with hope, health, and happiness. Please consult your healthcare professional for any medical advice. If you find this content helpful, then join in our mission of eradicating preventable suffering. Let's learn from Victor. So, Victor, tell us, how did this topic become important in your life?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. In simple, I experienced it. Sometimes, as they say, experience is the best teacher. Back in 2011, when I was in graduate school, I experienced the beginnings of what was my first experience with burnout that I can recall. And what stood out to me was just this overwhelming feeling of fatigue that had nothing to do with sleep. That was the first recognizable experience. I think that just disoriented me internally. I was extremely active at the time. Still am relatively as I'm recovering from lower leg surgery, but I was extremely active. I would be in bed 9, 10 o'clock, up at 6 o'clock or so, playing basketball with a group of guys and just enjoying the fellowship and the fun, fitness. So I was getting good sleep. I was active, so on and so forth. And of course, my mind was engaged in school, and just the community there was just a tremendous blessing. But I was burned out. Is the first occurrence that I had with it. So the deep feeling that was present in at that episode of burnout was the fatigue that wasn't related to actually sleeping. I didn't have a name for it at the time, and so of course, as as life would have it, what you don't learn the first time, you experience it again. And a few years later, as I began my work as a pastor, as I began my work as a pastor, I went through this similar feeling where the fatigue I was familiar with, but it was an added layer of what felt like depression. I was sad. I typically an upbeat person. I was smiling, laughing, so on and so forth. But very often, particularly at home, I was very just I was just inward. While my wife and I had a great relationship where we spent a lot of time traveling and time together. She asked me in this particular episode, "Are you depressed?" That question was one that I had never really encountered before or even wrestled with, and because it was just the question was it really kind of penetrated to um, it was a penetrating question that really challenged me to confront and face what reality was rather than what I wanted it to be.
Mhm.
And so I honestly said, I don't know. I don't know. And at that point, I just said, you know, it's probably best that I find a therapist to look into what's going on so that I can, you know, be myself again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, went to therapy. And one of the things that was kind of really a flag, so to speak, the therapeutic journey was great. But as the therapist did the evaluation for depression, the levels, according to the evaluation that was used, were normal. Normal to the low end of, like, I wasn't as depressed as I thought I was. Essentially, were the results, and so that kind of made me say, like, what? Like, I know that I'm not myself, but I'm not clinically depressed, and it was even on the lower end of what would even be classified as even just an acute case of depression. And so that just really sat in the back of my mind, because, you know, I was there. I was like, hey, there's still some things that I can work through, even if that's not what I'm dealing with. And so learn from that experience. And so fast forward just a few years later, back in 2018, the experience comes back again. And
Mm.
so at this point, it's the fatigue is still there, the feelings of depression, though at this point I've, you know, been to therapy and it's not clinical depression, that's there. And then this added layer of just being having a deep loss of motivation, wanting to just quit work. That reality really set in when I shared that with my wife, that I was just ready, just really spent. And it wasn't suicide, it hadn't reached suicidal ideation for me, but it was just with work. I didn't want anything to do with it. And so working through that um, was what my desire was. And so identifying it became a priority to me. Like, what's actually going on? This is the third time I recognize experiencing this. And as I began to do my research and explore, it's when I came across burnout. And as I shared with you before, that visceral feeling that, oh, aha, like eureka, like I found the answer to what the problem actually is. And from that moment forward, it was just it just really sent me on a mission to ensure that as many people as possible were not plagued with this syndrome of burnout, and they didn't know it, but also didn't have clear and supportive strategy to recover and prevent going back there again.
Wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that you are on that mission and I'm glad to be part of this mission.
Yeah,
So tell me, and we'll go into the some of the specific details of some of the tools that helped you. But
yeah.
before we go into that, tell me how life changed after you applied some of the tools that you're going to talk about.
No, absolutely. I would just simply classify it as this, with this word liberation. Um,
Freedom.
yeah, yeah, liberation, freedom. In my faith tradition of Christianity, one of the considered the father of Black theology, Black liberation theology, the late Dr. James Cone. He was asked the question of what a Christian is, and he, in one setting after a class, he said that Christian is one that is on the journey of liberation. And so that quote just really sits and resonates with me. And I would just deeply say that liberation and the evolving levels and dynamics of liberation is what I continue to experience as I continue in my recovery and preventative journey with burnout.
Wonderful, wonderful. Your life is better, your health is also better.
Yeah. So the funny thing is, I've always been a relatively healthy person. I'm being honest. I've been optimally healthy, you know, my life, and been active. And so one of the things that I do like to emphasize sometimes is that there can be an while exercise and creating endorphins and getting all of the positive hormones released can be helpful at some level and be incorporated with burnout. Sometimes the burnout is so deep that exercise won't touch it. that exercise alone won't be sufficient, or just getting good sleep won't be sufficient, as I spoke about earlier. And so, while my health physically, I mean, throughout this time, I was going to checkups and nothing was showing up as problematic. But my mindset, my outlook, my ability to see life from as what some call a non-dualistic perspective, where it has to only be this or that, but being able to see a more full picture, are some of the benefits that I'm experiencing now. The ability to be present, and be in the moment, and recognize that, hey, I'm trying to be too far. I'm still stuck in the past, or I'm trying to race to the future, and just really being present in the moment, are gifts that are part of this liberation experience. And then I think kind of a not a capture all phrase, but definitely included in the experience of liberation is an increased emotional intelligence, the ability to name my feelings, the ability to talk about them, the ability to wrestle with them. Um, those are things that are a part of my journey, that are deeply vital to prevention, but the continued process of recovery.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, yeah, our audience would love to learn some of the tools that helped you so that they can help them too. So, why don't you share some of the tools, and then also share how did you know the stages as you recovered from your burnout?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So the tools I will share just in these, I share them. I call them tools for your journey, in recovery, and ultimate or intervention, recovery and prevention. But the tools begin with community. Um, First, being connected to a community, and that community can take different forms. It can begin with a therapist. Therapists can be along the journey, but it can be friends, it can be family. But essentially, the way I define community are individuals, or people or group, that you are able to be seen, that you are able to be fully accepted, and at the same time challenged and encouraged, in a way that may be uncomfortable but necessary for the vitality and growth of your full self. And then the ability to do that as well for the other people in the group, in a shared and safe space.
Mm.
And so, building that community, obviously in certain relationships, professional relationships, it can be a bit one way, but that can be a starting point, for those that may struggle a bit with sharing their life with those that are closest to them, and keeping them at arm's length, so to speak, emotionally,
Mm.
and
So they
and
could be
relation.
neutral. So they could be neutral instead of,
They
you know,
could be, yeah. And
yeah.
so sometimes that can be the benefit of going to see a professional. Of course, the fear of, like, I don't want anybody to know my business, or I don't want anyone to think that I'm weak. And so sometimes I think therapy is a necessary part of the journey, regardless of whether you're comfortable or not. But I think, particularly for those that are not in the space of sharing relationships where vulnerability is welcome, or they haven't quite identified who those individuals are that they can be that way with, or they are safe enough with. I think starting with a therapist is a perfect starting point, in order to get the to increase the vitality of your emotional intelligence.
Wonderful, wonderful. Before we started this podcast, we were talking about a framework that you use that
Yeah.
helps you. I think that be really helpful for our audience to have that framework. Can you share that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it really comes about in really bringing all of who I am to the space of wellness and burnout. But my first degree is in civil engineering, and one of the uh, ideas, obviously, of innovation, technology, and development. One of the concepts that was shared during that time was the concept of biomimicry.
Mm.
Um, It is essentially what the term is, bio copying what happens in life. In essence, what occurs is we track what nature does and apply what nature does in particular to particular human problems for solutions. This is a technical terminology that has been given, that has been coined since the late early 90s, but it's an idea that's been used for millennium by various civilizations. And so it's primarily focused on technology, engineering, and innovation. And so I've applied this to the work of human well being and mental health, particularly on the topic of burnout. And so essentially, the prototype that we use in discussing and addressing burnout is the wildfire. Well, it kind of makes sense. The burnout feels like a fire has consumed and destroyed and damaged elements, portions, or even it feels like your whole life, depending on the stage of burnout that you have experienced. Similar to even a wildfire, we all know that wildfires don't start destroying acres. It begins by a spark that begins to spread and spread and becomes more uncontrollable. And so you can already see just the very close correlations between the wildfire, as well as with the experience of burnout. But essentially, what occurs in nature, what environmentalists do after a wildfire has occurred, is what's vitally important for those of us that have experienced burnout. What environmentalists do is they go in three general phases: is they identify what caused the fire. They then identify how the forest can begin recovery, and then they track within three stages within the last stage, the actual journey to stabilization, which can take up to about 20 years sometime, depending on how much damage was actually done. But one of the key elements that really was foundational for me, and is for those that I share this with, is that the forest is able, research has shown the forest is able to recover from the fire without human help. That if given time, nature will heal itself. And it begins with what's already in the ground. It's the seeds that are already in the ground that are developed and designed to use the fire as a fertilizer to begin again. And that foundational reality is really kind of a chain breaker, because so many times the the um, the desire may be to, like, what else do I need? What else do I need? And coming to the point of accepting that what I need, I have access to already. It's available to me. It's within me. It may need to be unleashed. It may need to be developed, but it's with me. My awareness of it may need to increase. And so, in tracking the stages, like the environmentalists, we want to find out what caused it.
But let me stop you.
Go ahead. Go
Before
ahead.
before they even find out what caused it, first they have to put down the fire.
No, absolutely.
So if fire is burning, it's just like, yes, you want to identify where the source is coming from, but first you have to put out the flames and put out the
Absolutely.
progressions. You have to stop that so that it doesn't continue to grow. And the second point that you were talking about, I thought, okay, well, the forest can recover if it doesn't keep on getting on fire again and again.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And this
Yes.
this is where the work of the human support has benefits and is helpful. But just from a scientific and research perspective,
Yeah.
the work that is done is what's already available in the environment and the ecosystem. Yeah,
Right, right. And
yeah,
so we, in case of the human burnout, we have inner capacity to recover, but we
absolutely,
also need to take steps of preventing recurrent episodes. So
absolutely.
we allow our mind and our body to recover fully.
Absolutely. And it's important to also add, just from an environmental and ecosystem standpoint, that as when fires occur in nature, the plants, many of the plants build this fireproof retardant in their in their rebuilding stage that prevents similar fire from happening again.
Hmm. So
So
they become
nature,
resilient. They become resilient.
nature has its own way of recovery. Obviously, obviously you can create a fire that is more than what nature is able to be resilient against per se. But just the concept is researched in there, that they essentially become fireproof. The plants become fire. Many of the plants become fireproof as a result of going through the fire.
Mhm.
And so essentially wanting to create, nature does it, as we learn, receive, and give to nature. This being, I believe, a valuable lesson and training that we ought to sit at nature's feet to learn.
Yeah, that's a wonderful analogy. I had never heard that before, and it just kind of makes so much sense. So much sense. So, burnout can happen. You can take steps to recover from burnout, and you can take steps to prevent the burnout. So, you could be actually a better version of yourself because it made you
Absolutely.
stronger, like those plants. So, can you earlier, before we went into this model of thinking,
Yeah,
you mentioned community as one of the major resources to help
absolutely.
recover. What were your stages of recovery? If kind of you think over, you realized that you were going through, so you found your community. What other steps did you take, and how did you feel that you are now getting better?
Yeah. So I think one of the things is I've been in I'm a naturally analytical person, so I'm always thinking through things as they're happening, and even reflecting on them after the fact. And so, my journey wasn't as clear and simplified as I teach it. And so, one of the reasons that I've simplified it in this way, so that the overwhelming is as simplified as necessary.
Right. You're
So
already struggling with too much. Your mind is already
absolutely,
foggy. You want to have the
absolutely,
simplest explanation so
that's
you can
exactly right.
actually act.
That's exactly right. So, my journey, particularly in the early stages, I would say was just a bit of, I'd become, I'd acknowledge it, I'd become aware, I take action, and then just like I feel like I'm just kind of spinning in circles, and part of it was because of having to continue to dig deeper at some of the triggers, and the causes of burnout to begin with. And so that was one of the experiences that I had, and it was, I think I would definitely say, a bit frustrating at some level, because I didn't completely realize how the how deeply embedded the trigger was, in my psychological way of relating to life and understanding. And so as I share with others, I build into the I build into the teaching, helping people to realize that from the beginning, that the recovery journey, very similar to nature, is a process and not this quick kind of microwavable thing that I just kind of get over. I think, as you're saying, when we talk about stopping the fire, identifying just kind of what I can get my hands on immediately to, to stop as much as I can the feeling of burnout. But again, depending on where you are in the stage, it may be, it people have started evacuating, to use the wildfire framework. People have already started evacuating the community, and houses are being burned. And so, the damage done has been so significant for some people, in burnout, that it may be a bit more difficult to recognize that. And so, to simplify it for some, just being able to acknowledge, fully accept that, hey, I'm burned out, at some level is the beginning of liberation. Because for many people, and even in the work that I'm doing, and the people that I speak to, the denial of burnout is a real problem. Because so many, it occurs for people that are not only, but primarily those that are high achievers, ambitious, those that are driven. And so it's as Dr. Fordenberger, the coiner of the phrase, framed it. Uh, it's the high cost of success. And so if you are that type of person, acknowledging that you have a particular weakness or need help is not something that's easy to do all the time. And so just the acknowledging of it, the acknowledgement of its presence, its impact, um, is a win.
Yeah.
Is,
Yeah.
is a huge win.
Yeah, and like in any area, if you identify the problem, then you can take steps to remedy it. But if you don't know the problem, then you won't do anything to remedy it.
Absolutely, absolutely, and
So recognizing, acknowledging is the first part. Like in wildfire cases, like acknowledging that that is or that is happening. Where is the source, and then stopping that source from spreading, is is the way to go. And so, in terms of, I just kind of realized that we were having fun and the time passed, and so we need to wrap up. So, do you have any, like, your best advice for the audience before we wrap up?
yeah, I would say, in kind of coming back to the center of the recovery journey, is begin to explore the differentiation and connection between who you are and what you do.
So
So
many
so
times we mix it up, right?
they become so blended that they aren't separated. So in following just the process of nature and just going back to the our environment, a plant has, if we simplify it, just two parts. If we simplify it, oversimplify it to two parts: the root system and the actual surface portion that is visible above the terrain. And if we were to liken our who we are to our root system, and what we do to the actual plant or the tree that is over above surface, and see that, of course, obviously, in order for what I do to be of value to not just myself but also to the environment around me, I must remain rooted. And so many times as we grow up, in many cases we lose who we are in a pursuit for what we want to do. And so beginning to recover, coming back, can't remember the author of the quote, but the inner child in us always will desire to come out of us. And so really just becoming more attached to and integrating who we are, who we were as a child. I have three children, toddlers, that are running around the house, and they're constant reminders of the reality that they don't care at this point about what they do. Who they are is all about playing and having fun, laughing, and those sort of things. And so coming back, being relentless and intentional of coming back to growing our root system will be so profoundly important to the recovery and prevention journey. When we've lost who we are, when a root system comes up, a tree, no matter how tall it is, no matter how much, no matter how wide it is, it will come down.
Yeah. Yes.
And in the same way in our lives. And so being rooted in who we are, and being able to differentiate, starting the process of differentiating the two, I believe is a paramount element of the journey.
Profound, profound. Yeah, we use a technique called grounding technique.
Mhm.
Then we kind of visualize that we are like a tree, and you're kind of staying grounded really helps us in many ways. Lots to talk about. Hopefully, maybe we can do it again. But
I'd
let
love that.
me, if people want to reach you and learn more about you, where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn, Victor Bartley. You can also see my business page, Victor Speaks Life, where I share information, tips, insights regarding burnout, the burnout intervention journey. You can also check out my website, victorspeakslife.org, and you can inquire, and we can connect in that way as well. If you are in need of coaching, or your organization is struggling through burnout, and actually addressing the problem of burnout. The other way of reaching me is on Instagram. I am stampout.burnout is my handle there on Instagram, and sharing tips as well and content regarding the burnout intervention journey.
Wonderful, wonderful. And thank you for sharing the gift stages of burnout recovery that our audience can find by going to happyandhealthymind.com. So I invite you all to visit our website, happyandhealthymind.com, and click the button resources, and you'll be able to find all the resources from our various guests. If you're in US, you can also text the word joyful to the number 38470, and we'd be happy to send you reminders and resources links over there. And so let's wrap up. Let me leave you with this thought. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. What do you choose? Are you going to continue to allow the wildfire to spread? Or are you going to take small steps to prevent this wildfire that can happen in you, that can rob you of your ability to function, to be productive, to be able to enjoy your life, and to be the best version of yourself? So, are you going to take small step, one step today in your journey towards wellness? Till next time, Dr. Rozina. And thank you, Victor, for joining us today.